I had just signed the last box at the storage unit, the one with my late wife's winter coat still folded inside, when my 9-year-old granddaughter tugged the sleeve of my jacket. Not a gentle tug. Both hands, pulling hard, the way children do when they need you to stop moving and actually listen. "Grandpa," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't sign anything Mommy gives you." I heard her on the phone. She said, "You won't understand what it means." I looked down at those eyes, big and dark and completely serious, and my first instinct was to do what grandfathers do. Smile, reassure, change the subject. But she was still holding my sleeve, and her hands were shaking. "Please," she said, "please believe me." I believed her. And what I found after that still makes me sick to my stomach every single morning when I wake up in the house I've lived in for 31 years. Before I tell you what my granddaughter heard that afternoon, leave me a comment below. Where in Canada are you watching from, and what time is it there? I want to know who's still awake right now, listening to the story that saved everything I had left. It was a Tuesday in late October. The kind of cold that comes in fast off Lake Ontario and gets into your knees before you've even noticed it. I'm 64 years old, retired 2 years ago after 30 years as an electrical contractor in Burlington. My wife passed 18 months before that, pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to gone. We had a daughter together. She was 36 that autumn, recently divorced, and she had moved back into the house in September with my granddaughter, under the reasonable, generous, entirely believable reason of helping me through my grief. I was grateful. I told myself I was lucky to have her. The house felt less empty when my granddaughter was in it, drawing at the kitchen table, asking me to read to her, leaving her boots in exactly the wrong place near the front door in the way that makes you feel like a family again. My daughter had always been difficult, but grief softens your memory of people's edges. I told myself she had changed, that losing her mother had changed her. I should have paid attention sooner. The signs were there. I was just choosing not to see them. My daughter had started asking questions about money about 3 weeks after moving in. Casual, conversational questions at first. She would mention the house almost as an aside. "Do you know what a place like this would sell for now, Dad?" She would sit across from me at the kitchen table with her laptop open and show me listings in the neighborhood, pointing out numbers that made my eyebrows go up. Then she would pivot, quickly, smoothly, to something else entirely, almost like she hadn't said it. She asked about my pension, about the RRSP accounts, about whether I had reviewed my TFSA recently because rates were changing, and she had been reading about seniors who were losing money by keeping savings in the wrong places. She said she had a friend in finance who could help. She said it would be good for me to have someone to talk to, professionally, about planning. She said she just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I told myself she was being responsible. That was what I told myself. Then she started mentioning power of attorney. Just in passing, she mentioned that her friend from her yoga class had helped her elderly mother set one up, and it had made everything so much easier. She mentioned it was something every person my age should have in place. She said it was simply about being prepared, about making sure that if anything ever happened to me, someone could step in without things getting complicated. She mentioned it so many times, so gently, so reasonably, that I began to feel as though I was being irresponsible for not having already done it. The afternoon at the storage unit, I had finally agreed to look at some paperwork she said her friend in finance had put together. Nothing to sign yet, she had said, just to read. We were driving home in my truck, my granddaughter buckled in the back, and that was when it happened. A small hand on my sleeve, those shaking words. "Don't sign anything Mommy gives you." I heard her on the phone. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine running. My daughter had gone ahead inside. My granddaughter was watching me from the back seat in the rearview mirror, waiting to see if I would dismiss her the way I had dismissed the other things she had tried to tell me over the past few weeks. The phone call she said she overheard at night. The man she said she saw parked in front of our house twice in 1 week, the one her mother waved at through the window. I had told her she must have misunderstood. I had told her not to worry. I had patted her on the head and sent her to watch television. And now she was looking at me with her jaw set and her eyes too old for 9 years old, and she was waiting to find out if I was the kind of grandfather who actually listened. I turned around in my seat and I looked at her properly. "Tell me exactly what you heard," I said. She told me. Her mother had been on the phone in the bedroom with the door almost closed 2 nights before. My granddaughter had gotten up for a glass of water and heard her voice through the gap. She heard her mother say his accounts are easy to access once the POA is in place. She heard her mother laugh. She heard her mother say he trusts me completely, he won't even question it. He still thinks I'm here because I care. He trusts me completely. He won't even question it. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I told my granddaughter she had done the right thing. I told her she was brave. I told her that whatever happened next, she was not in trouble, and I was not angry, and I needed her to act completely normal for the rest of the evening. "Can you do that for me?" I asked. She nodded, solemn as a little judge. She was 9 years old, and she understood what was at stake better than I had for the previous 3 weeks. We went inside. My daughter was already in the kitchen making tea, perfectly warm and normal and domestic. The paperwork was sitting on the kitchen table in a manila folder. I glanced at it, told her I was tired from the storage unit, and would look at it tomorrow. She smiled, said of course, not a flicker of anything wrong in her face. She was very good. That was the part that hollowed me out most. Later, she was very, very good. I did not sleep that night. What I did instead was sit in the den with the door closed and think like a contractor, which is to say I thought about load-bearing structures. I thought about what was real and what I could verify. My daughter had moved in 6 weeks ago. She had a boyfriend I had met once, briefly. A man about her age who worked in what she described vaguely as consulting, and who had shaken my hand with the specific excessive warmth of someone performing warmth. She had begun asking about money within 3 weeks of arriving. She had been quietly, persistently steering me toward a power of attorney document that her own contact had prepared, which meant the document had been prepared by someone working in her interest, not mine. I thought about the RRSP, about the TFSA, about the house, which I had paid off 7 years ago and which was worth, by my daughter's own enthusiastic estimation, somewhere north of $900,000 on the current Burlington market. I thought about my CPP and my pension from the Electrical Workers Union. I thought about the fact that I was a 64-year-old widower living alone with a woman who wanted to be my power of attorney and who had said on the phone that she was not there because she cared. Then I thought about my old friend from the Union Hall, a lawyer named Martin, who had sat at the same table as me at my wife's funeral and pressed his card into my hand and said, "Call me if you ever need anything at all." I had thanked him and put the card in my wallet and not thought about it since. I found it at 2 a.m, sitting on the edge of the den couch in the dark, and I held it for a long time. The next morning, while my daughter was driving my granddaughter to school, I called Martin. He answered before the second ring. I told him what my granddaughter had heard. I told him about the paperwork. I told him about the boyfriend I had met once, who worked in consulting and shook hands too warmly. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't touch that folder. Don't sign a single thing. Come to my office today, before she gets back, and bring whatever financial statements you can access." I drove to his office in downtown Burlington with a folder of my own, and I spread my own papers across his desk, and we looked at them together. What Martin saw made him go very still. The power of attorney document in the manila folder, which I had photographed quietly with my phone at 3 a.m, had not been prepared by a financial advisor. It had been prepared by a paralegal service connected to a man that Martin recognized. A man with a history of elder financial fraud cases in Halton region, 2 of which had resulted in charges, neither of which had resulted in convictions, because by the time the families of the victims had understood what had happened, the money was moved and the documentation was technically clean. The boyfriend was not a consultant. The boyfriend was a man who had done this before. Martin sat back in his chair. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses the way lawyers do when they have bad news that is also, somehow, actionable. He said, "You need to understand how this works. They would have had you sign the power of attorney, and it would have looked legitimate. The document gives the named person full authority over your financial decisions. They could liquidate the RRSP, access the TFSA, and depending on the scope of the document, potentially initiate a sale of the property. With a compliant lawyer or notary on their side, and the right framing, this can move very quickly. She was your daughter. You were grieving. A judge reviewing it afterward would see a bereaved senior who trusted his family. These cases almost never get reversed. I thought about $900,000 in house equity. I thought about my retirement savings. I thought about my wife's life insurance, which had come to me 14 months ago and which I had put carefully away for the future. I thought about my granddaughter hearing her mother laugh and say he trusts me completely, and not being able to make herself sleep that night, getting up for a glass of water, standing in the hallway, deciding to remember every word. I asked Martin what we needed to do. He said the same thing a good lawyer always says when the evidence exists, but the confession doesn't. We need her voice on record. We need her to say it plainly, to someone she thinks is on her side, in a place with witnesses. He called a detective he knew at the Halton Regional Police Service, a woman who worked financial crimes and elder fraud. She came to Martin's office that afternoon. She was matter-of-fact and thorough in the way that people are when they have seen this particular story too many times and have stopped being surprised by it but have not stopped being angry about it. She looked at the photograph of the POA document. She looked at the information on the boyfriend. She looked at me. She said, "I want you to know that this is more common than most people realize. Financial abuse of seniors by family members is one of the most underreported crimes in this province." She said, "I also want you to know that what your granddaughter did took courage, and it matters." Something loosened in my chest when she said that. Someone with a badge was telling me my 9-year-old granddaughter had done the right thing, and that I was right to listen. The plan was simple in the way that the best plans always are. I would go home and tell my daughter I had looked at the folder, that I had some questions about the wording, and that I wanted to have coffee with her and talk it through before signing. Not at the house, somewhere public. The Tim Hortons on Brant Street, where we had gone together dozens of times when she was younger. Familiar, comfortable, crowded on a weekday morning. I would wear a body mic, which the detective would show me how to tape correctly under my flannel shirt. Martin would be at a table by the window with his laptop. 2 officers would be at other tables in plain clothes. The detective would be in a car in the parking lot with the audio. My daughter had to believe she had already won. That was the key. Emberlyn had said it about the original case, and the detective said it too, in her own words. People who think they've already won stop being careful. I went home. My daughter was making dinner. My granddaughter was at the kitchen table doing homework and did not look up when I walked in, which was exactly what I had told her to do, and which she managed with a composure that broke something in me quietly and privately. She was 9 years old, and she was protecting me by pretending she didn't know everything she knew. I sat down across from my daughter. I told her I had looked at the folder. I told her I had a few questions, nothing complicated, but that I thought better with coffee in my hand. And could we go to Tim Hortons in the morning and talk it through? She looked at me with that warm, patient expression she had been wearing for 6 weeks. She said, "Of course, Dad. Whatever makes you comfortable." I almost couldn't eat dinner. I sat at the table with my granddaughter and my daughter, and I passed the salt, and I listened to my granddaughter talk about her science project, and I thought about 31 years in that house. I thought about my wife's garden, still out back, gone to the fall now. I thought about the way my daughter had cried at her mother's funeral and whether any of it had been real, and I told myself I couldn't know that yet, and that right now the only thing that mattered was tomorrow morning. My granddaughter hugged me before bed, her arms around my neck, her cheek against my jaw. She held on a little longer than usual. I held on back. That was our conversation. We didn't need any other. The next morning was clear and cold. The kind of November morning in Burlington where the sky is that pale gray that makes everything look like a photograph. I taped the body mic exactly where the detective had shown me. Flannel shirt over top. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. 64 years old, retired electrician, widower. I had built things my entire adult life. I had wired houses and commercial buildings and a hospital wing in Hamilton that I was still quietly proud of. I had trusted my instincts for every job I ever took. I had stopped trusting them the moment grief made the world go soft around the edges. Not anymore. I drove us to Tim Hortons on Brant Street. My daughter ordered a large double-double, same as always, and I got my usual medium dark roast, and we sat across from each other in a booth near the side wall. Through the window I could see Martin's car in the lot. I did not look at the table where the officer with the gray jacket was sitting, or at the woman reading her phone near the counter, or at the man with the hockey bag 2 tables over. I put the manila folder on the table between us. I opened it to the signature page. "There are a few things in here I don't recognize," I said. "This language on page 3, about financial institutions." "What does that mean exactly?" She explained it to me, patiently, simply, in the voice of someone who had rehearsed this. She said it was just standard language that allowed the named attorney to speak to banks on my behalf. She said it was completely routine. She said every senior her friend worked with had the same clause and no one had ever had any issues. I nodded. I looked at the page. I said, "And this section here about real property, does this mean you could make decisions about the house?" She paused. Just briefly. A half-second hesitation that I would not have noticed 3 weeks ago and that I could not miss now. Then she said, "Only if something happened to you, Dad. Only if you couldn't make those decisions yourself. It's just a precaution." I said, "What kind of something?" She said, "Well, if you had a health event, a fall, or cognitive issues. Things that can happen as we get older. She reached across the table and touched my hand. I just want to make sure you're protected, she said. I want to make sure someone you trust is in a position to help. Someone you trust. I looked at her hand on top of mine. I thought about his accounts are easy to access once the POA is in place. I thought about he trusts me completely. I thought about my granddaughter's 2 hands gripping my sleeve in the storage unit parking lot, shaking. I said, I talked to Martin yesterday. The color shifted in her face. Not dramatically. She was too controlled for that. But I saw it. A slight drawing in around the eyes, a recalibration happening behind them. Martin, she said carefully. From the union? I said yes. I told him I was thinking of signing a power of attorney and I wanted his advice. He looked at the document. He recognized the name of the paralegal service. He told me this firm has a connection to a man who has been investigated twice in Halton region for elder financial fraud. She pulled her hand back. Dad. She said my name the way she had been saying it for 6 weeks, warm and patient and slightly worn. She was still in the performance. I could see her deciding to stay in it. Dad, I don't know where Martin is getting his information, but I can assure you that my friend is completely legitimate. If you want, I can have her speak to Martin directly. I just want what's best for you. I said, do you know what he's been charged with before? Her boyfriend. Something moved across her face. Quickly. Gone before I could name it. She said, I don't know what you're implying. I said, I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you directly. I know about the 2 fraud investigations. I know about the accounts he helped other families access and what happened to those accounts. I want you to tell me, sitting here right now, whether any of that has anything to do with the document you put on our kitchen table. The cafe was quiet around us. Not silent. The espresso machine was running. Someone near the door was laughing at something. The ordinary Saturday sounds of a busy Tim Hortons. But the people who mattered were very still. My daughter looked at me for a long moment. And then, in the same way I had watched it described in the story that had first made me realize what I was dealing with, something changed behind her eyes. The warmth went out of them like a light being switched off. What was left was flat and cold, and entirely different from anything I had ever seen in my child's face before, or thought I had seen, or had perhaps been refusing to see for longer than I wanted to admit. She leaned back in the booth. She picked up her coffee cup. She looked at me the way you look at a problem you've been managing and are now reassessing. You have no idea, she said, how exhausting it has been. Managing you, being here every day, watching you wander around that house with her pictures on every wall, acting like you're the only person who ever lost someone. She was my mother, Dad, but you couldn't see past your own grief long enough to notice that I was drowning too. I've been drowning for years. I've been in debt for 3 years. My marriage fell apart because of money. I had nothing. And you're sitting on close to $2 million in assets and you're using it to store her winter coats. I said nothing. I let her keep going. She said, it wasn't going to hurt you. The accounts, the house equity, you wouldn't have even felt it at first. By the time you understood what had happened, we'd have been in another province. It was clean. It was simple. The POA was legitimate. The signatures would have been yours. There was nothing illegal about it as long as you signed voluntarily. She looked at the folder on the table, and you were going to sign. You were so desperate to believe I was there because I loved you that you were going to sign whatever I put in front of you. I said, what about your daughter? What about what this does to her? Something flickered across her face for the first time that looked like an actual human feeling. Then it was gone. She would have been fine, she said. Children are resilient. I would have taken care of her. I looked at my daughter and I tried to find the person I had raised in that face. And I want to be honest with you because that honesty is the whole point of telling this story. I found traces. I found the little girl who had sat on my lap while I watched hockey and fallen asleep against my shoulder. I found the teenager who had cried in the car the night of her first real heartbreak and let me drive her around for an hour without saying a word. I found all of those things, and they broke my heart, and they did not change a single fact about what she had just said. I opened my jacket slightly and showed her the wire. Her face went completely white. The detective came through the door. The officer in the gray jacket stood up. The woman by the counter put her phone in her pocket. The detective walked straight to our table with her badge already in her hand, and she looked at my daughter with the quiet authority of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She told my daughter her rights clearly and completely. My daughter did not lunge for the door. She did not scream. She sat very still in the booth and looked at me across the table as they placed her under arrest, and her expression was something I have turned over in my mind many times since. It was not rage. It was not guilt. It was a kind of bitter, exhausted recognition, as if some part of her had known all along that this was where it ended, and was almost relieved to finally be there. Her boyfriend was taken into custody the same morning. He cooperated fully, gave up the names of the paralegal and the specific financial accounts, and entered a guilty plea to fraud-related charges 9 weeks later. The fact that he moved quickly, Martin told me, was because he knew the evidence was solid and was calculating his sentence. He did not do it out of conscience. I want to be accurate about that. My daughter was charged with conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a vulnerable adult, a charge that carries serious weight in Ontario. The court proceedings took 8 months. I will not walk through all of them here, but I will tell you one thing that happened during those 8 months that I think matters. My daughter's defense lawyer argued that the plan had never been fully executed, that no document had actually been signed, that no money had actually moved, and that the whole case rested on a conversation overheard by a 9-year-old child. My granddaughter was not called to testify. She was too young, and it was decided that recorded audio from the Tim Hortons, combined with the boyfriend's cooperation and the documentary evidence, was sufficient. But the detective told me afterward that in her statement to investigators, my granddaughter had been precise, detailed, and completely consistent. Every word she had reported hearing matched the phone records and the evidence. She was 9 years old, and she had remembered every single word correctly because she had understood at 9 years old that someone she loved was in danger, and the words mattered. My daughter received a conditional sentence and 3 years of probation. I know that sounds lenient to some people, and I understand why. The judge noted the absence of an executed document, the family context, and the absence of prior criminal record. I sat in that courtroom and I felt many things, and very few of them were simple, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She was my daughter. I had taught her to ride a bike in that Burlington driveway. I had gone to every school concert and every parent-teacher interview and sat up waiting for her through every teenage curfew. Grief does not stop being grief because the person who caused it also betrayed you. It just becomes a different, more complicated weight to carry. The divorce was final 7 months later. My daughter and I have not spoken since the sentencing. My granddaughter lives with me now, legally, by court order, which came with the kind of paperwork I actually chose to sign and which I understood completely before I did. She is 11 now. She is in 5th grade and has a best friend named Priya who comes over on weekends, and the two of them turn the living room into an obstacle course with couch cushions. My granddaughter likes her eggs scrambled, not fried. She has started asking questions about how electricity works, which I find professionally gratifying. She sleeps through the night mostly. So do I mostly. I did not sell the house. I updated the wiring in the garage last spring, which needed doing anyway. And I replanted 2 of the raised beds that my wife had started in the back garden because my granddaughter wanted to grow tomatoes. She was very serious about the tomatoes. We got 7 that were actually worth eating, and she was disproportionately proud of all 7. I kept one of the photographs that my daughter had called a sign of my inability to move on. It sits on the mantel, and I look at it every morning, and I feel something that is grief and love and the quiet satisfaction of a man who is still here and still in his own house. I teach a workshop now, twice a year, at the Burlington Public Library. It is run through a partnership with a seniors advocacy organization, and it covers financial power of attorney, what the documents actually mean, how elder financial fraud works in Ontario, and how to verify anyone who asks you to trust them with your assets. Martin helps me run it. The detective has come twice to speak to the group. The room is always full. The people who sit in those chairs are not foolish people. They are people who have lost someone and whose grief made them soft around the edges for a season. They are people who love their families and want to believe the best. They are people who, given the right moment of vulnerability, could have their entire life's work quietly dismantled by someone who had studied their trust and their loneliness and their desperate need to believe that their family still loved them. I tell them about my granddaughter every single time. I tell them that the warning came from someone small and young and with everything to lose by speaking up. Someone who had already been dismissed once, who had no way of knowing if she would be believed or dismissed again, who had every reason to stay quiet and did not. I tell them that the bravest thing I did in this whole story was not the wire in the coffee shop or the conversation with Martin or the 8 months of court proceedings. The bravest thing I did was turn around in the front seat of my truck in a storage unit parking lot and look at my granddaughter properly and ask her to tell me exactly what she heard. Children carry truths that adults have stopped letting themselves see. I do not mean this in a sentimental way. I mean it as practical advice. If the child who loves you is frightened and is asking you to listen and is shaking while they ask, stop the car, stop whatever you are doing. Look at them the way they deserve to be looked at. Ask them the question. You may find that the answer is nothing, that it was a misunderstanding or a dream or a fear that dissolves in daylight. And if that is what you find, that is a relief, and you have lost nothing but 20 minutes. But if it is not nothing, if it is exactly what it seems, then what you have gained by listening is immeasurable. What I gained was my retirement savings and my home and my wife's garden and 11 more years of watching my granddaughter grow up in the house where her grandmother's photographs still hang on the walls. Last week she came home from school and dropped her backpack by the front door in exactly the wrong place and grabbed a glass of juice from the fridge and sat across from me at the kitchen table with her math homework. And we sat there together in the good quiet that people who trust each other completely don't need to fill with words. After a while she looked up and said, "Grandpa, you have the same mug as yesterday." "I do," I said. "It's my favorite." She made a face that meant she found this both predictable and acceptable. She went back to her homework. I drank my coffee. Outside the window, the maple in the front yard had gone full red, the way it does every October without fail. The way it was doing when I first moved into this house with my wife 31 years ago. The way it was doing on the Tuesday in late October when a 9-year-old girl decided that the truth was worth saying even if no one had believed her before. She was right. The truth was worth saying, and I was right to listen. If this story means anything to you, please leave a comment below. If you are in a situation that feels like the edges of what I described, please call the Seniors Safety Line in Ontario, which is available 24 hours a day. Please talk to a lawyer you chose yourself, not one someone chose for you. Please do not sign documents you have not had independently reviewed. And if someone small and young and frightened is pulling on your sleeve and asking you to believe them, please stop what you are doing and look at them properly. That is all it takes. Sometimes that is everything.